الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Hujurat that we should avoid having a bad suspicion or a bad zan or bad conjecture about other individuals. Because if you literally translate it in ba'd al-dhanni, because some of this bad conjecture or bad thoughts about other people, negative thoughts about other people, is sinful. So what does it mean to have? And we talked about this a little bit yesterday at the tail end of the previous disease. So it's a good segue into particularly talking about what we call su'idhan. So we've been told in our instructing our religion to have husnidhan, that we'd want to try to think the best of other people. And so much so that if there's an individual who does something or we see something from them, we want to try to make as many excuses for that individual to make a good ta'wil, to make a good interpretation of their actions before we, ascribe any wrong interpretation to them. So, like, you want to make like 99 excuses for them if you can. And some of the righteous people in the past, they said that make 99 excuses for your brother, and if after that you still cannot make an excuse for them, then know that the fault is with you, that you couldn't find another excuse. So you want to, and there's a lot of hikmah in this. This is one of the things I think, for decades, this is one of the things I learned very early on, I guess in training, and it has really stood me in such good stead. It really helps you uh, live in the social network we live in such a nice way with other Muslims and other believers. Because one of the things that you see is so much of human conflict, right? That's what, for to a great degree, that you end up counseling people. And so much of human conflict is not necessarily based on the fact that one party is evil or venial or really wants to hurt the other party. So much of human conflict arises either as a byproduct of normal human friction. It's just like you have two bodies of matter. When they come into contact, just by natural laws, there's friction, right? And the rougher those bodies are, the more friction that you're going to have, and the more refined those bodies are and the smoother that they are, the less friction you're going to have. In the same way, people who are spiritually refined, you're going to have less friction when they come into contact with each other. And people who are rough at the edges, so to speak, when they come into contact with each other, they're going to be more friction. One of my teachers, he put it very beautifully. He said that, if you put two little kids in a room, they're going to get into a fight. Right? They fight about it, right? That's my toy. No, it's my toy. I saw it first. You hit me first. No, you hit me first. I hit you because you looked at me like that. No, you look at me like that first. They're going back and forth. Yeah, guys, stop it. No, he started it. No, you started it. You just can't get them to quiet down. But if you're in marriage counseling, it just looks the same way, right? It's almost like the same infantile type of arguments. It just becomes a little bit more loaded. And so he said, in the same way that you take two children and put them in the room, they start fighting. If you take two spiritual children and put them in the room, they'll also start fighting. And that's one of the reasons that so many people get into conflict with their spouses, is they're just not spiritually mature. They take things too seriously. They don't know how to let go. They don't know how to be patient. They speak at the wrong time. They say the wrong things. They fall into anger, so on and so forth. So I was saying that, making excuses. So making excuses, the way that this works is that so much of human conflict, if you see that it really doesn't arise because one party really means bad, it oftentimes occurs because there's just a miscommunication or a misunderstanding or cross. So one is normal friction. There's normal heat that arises from that interaction, but a lot of times it's because one person says something, the other person understood it another way. You have two different people, they have different perspectives on an issue, and it can very quickly devolve into conflict. And I have used this example many times in the past, but it's illustrative, right? So there's a husband and a wife. Um, all of a sudden, the wife goes quiet. She's not talking. Husband's like, "What happened?" She doesn't say anything. And he's like, no, what happened? What did I do now? She doesn't say anything. I don't want to talk about it. You're like, wait, we were just fine 5 minutes ago, right? We just came back from getting ice cream, and you're just gonna go quiet on me? She's like, just don't worry about it. So now he starts getting heated. What do you mean, don't worry about it? You're acting weird. She's like, just quiet. He says, look, I'm ordering you. You better tell me why you're getting mad. I'm your husband. You have to listen to me. She's quiet. You don't fear Allah. She's quiet. He shouts at her the whole way back in the car. She goes in the room, and she's crying, but she doesn't say anything. Now he's getting even more mad. Now she's crying. Why can't you just tell me what's going on? Right? So he goes to sleep angry. She's going to sleep crying. And then it turns out, like, in hindsight is 2020. Later on, when she finally he cracks her. But she says, look, the only reason I wasn't saying anything is every time I open my mouth, I end up hurting your feelings. So I just told myself I'm not going to say anything. Right. So it's a very, very realistic situation that can arise between a husband and a wife. But in this, if the husband, instead of thinking that she was being difficult, right, he immediately jumped to a negative thing. She could have made excuses. Maybe she's being quiet because she's hurt. Maybe there's something bothering her. Maybe she's not ready to talk right now. And sometimes, look, his mind probably, even if he made 99 excuses, wouldn't have gone to that one reason, right? Even if he made 99 excuses, he still wouldn't have gotten there to probably what's going on in her mind. Because, like, whatever goes on in a woman's mind is usually far beyond the reach and orbit of the human intellect for guys. So you're never going to figure it out anyway. So you might as well just make the best type of excuse that you can, because it diminishes the chance that you're going to get friction between individuals. And the same thing applies to in communities. Your sister goes to a party, your wife goes to a party, you come back and she's like, oh, look at that, no, that such and such person, she was looking at me funny. I mean, what do you mean looking at you funny? She was just giving me the eye. What does that mean even? Like the eye, right? And she like, no, I think she was just like smirking. I think she just thinks she's better than me. Um, how do you know that? No, I can just tell, right? Believe me, I've been around girls. I know girls. You don't know girls. I know girls. It's true. I haven't been around girls. I can't say I'm making this up. It's not a real life story. So now, how do you? So, but if instead of saying that, you can just say that you make a good excuse for them. So these are all different examples of having husn izan with individuals and trying to avoid su izan, and avoiding having a bad opinion about individuals. Now, someone asked me, why do people? Why did just recently asked me, why does Islam tell you that you shouldn't have a this bad zone about other individuals? Because it's very common. It's very common in the workplace that people, they don't trust anybody. They always look at everyone as if um, that they have some ulterior motive, that going to do something bad. So people are very like suspicious of each other. And he said that no, I try not to do that, but I'm just trying to understand why do people behave like that? Number one, and number two, why does Islam tell you that you shouldn't behave like that? So why do people behave like that? The reason that people behave like that are a couple of reasons. Now, one of the reasons is because people have been burned in life and they become jaded. And often, the more you live life and the more you have bad run-ins with other individuals, the more jaded people become, and the more suspicious and skeptical and they become of other individuals. So much so that when people see human kindness, it's a very common refrain that you see that restored my faith in humanity. Meaning, like, people are pretty much stink most of the time, and once in a while you find someone who's actually does something which is kind, and you're like, oh wow, people can actually be nice. They think like no one's nice, that there's no goodwill left in the world, and I mean, it is sort of true that people tend to, be riddled with spiritual diseases and not treat each other very well. So I can understand where they're coming from. And then the second aspect is because they say al-maru yaqisu ala nafsi in the Arabic language, that people analogize on themselves. When a person sometimes has a spiritual disease, they think everyone else has that same spiritual disease. When a person, for example, has is two-faced or has hypocritical motives when they interact with other people, then their expectation is that other people are also dealing with them in that way. Because when you're inside the world, you can only see inside of it; you can't see outside of it. So because they're tainted, they project that taint onto everyone else, and then it makes a bad situation worse because not everyone is actually behaving like that, and it's hard for them to believe that in this day and age, a person can actually be that sincere and that well motivated. But people can be, right? And so that was the answer to that aspect. Now, why does the dean tell us that we shouldn't have a bad zan or su'e zan about other individuals? The reason for that is because people have an isma. People have an inherent honor. They have their inherent innocence and inherent respect. So much so that the honor and the blood of a believer is even more than the Kaaba. So, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ennobled the children of Adam. And so the default setting is that a person by default is in a position of nobility, in a position of respect, in a position of honor. So that's the default setting. You have to bring some evidence to take them and dethrone them from that position. Without evidence, you can do it. And just your thought, or what do you call that? Circumstantial evidence doesn't qualify. It has to be something solid. Um, you can, in other words, you could say that people are considered in the deen innocent until proven guilty, rather than the other way around, that you're saying that they're guilty until proven innocent. So we start off with the premise that people are good operators until there's some evidence to show that that's not the case. The other thing to bear in mind, so what is the difference between zon and, for example, real doubt about a certain situation that's something that makes you uneasy? So, for example, if you're in a dark alley, right, and you're walking in a dangerous neighborhood like East St. Louis, and some person starts walking towards you and starts reaching for their pocket, and they're walking at you in a threatening way, you don't sit around and say, "Oh, I shouldn't have suizan. Maybe he's going to give me some candy." Probably not. You should probably turn around and run the other way, right? So you should have, a modicum of common sense. You look at the different qara'in, you look at the different situations and that thing, and you should remove yourself from a place of thing. And we talked about last night how we reconcile that, because sometimes in situations a person is neutral, don't ascribe something negative, but they also need to present evidence to show that it is a positive. So if you're being careful, you're not saying that the person is going to shoot you. You don't know that, but you're being careful and just moving out of the way. So you should just move out of the way, and that's just common sense. No. And then that's actually, I'm glad that he mentioned that. We mentioned that verse at the beginning. So one of the, and I told you, ba'das, when you say ba'd, means some of something, right? So one of the scholars, he said it very beautifully. Over here in this, no, inna ba'da dhanni ism. Usually when you hear it, people think that some types of zan are ithm, right? Sometimes, being other types of zan are not ithm, right? That would be the interpretation. He said, don't take it like that. Take it in the way that even a little bit of zan, even a little bit of zan, if you have not, it's not all of it is not soy zan, but even a little bit of soy zan, then it can also be sinful. So be careful about that. And the other advice, so what is the treatment for this? One very good treatment in general normal human interactions is don't judge a book by their cover, right? So many times, there might be a person who walks into the masjid, he has tattoos all over his like hands, and people just sit there and they immediately jump to a conclusion about that individual, and they judge the person. They don't see the fact that he came to the masjid. Right? He's in the masjid. He came for some reason. Something came in his heart. So people sometimes, overlook that. Sometimes people see a girl and she's not wearing hijab, and then they make all types of assumptions. She might be a much better Muslim than another sister who's wearing hijab. Just because a person is doing one sin doesn't mean everything else is wrong. And just because a person is doing one thing right doesn't mean that they're doing everything else right. We don't know who's who with Allah, so we shouldn't make judgments. There was this one when we were in madrasa. I still remember this. There was this one qari who came from, and in the mother said that we were very orthodox, very conservative. It's in South Africa. Everyone has long beards. Everyone wears a skull cap. Everyone wears Islamic type dressing. Many people are going to wear amamas. It's unheard of that there was someone there that doesn't have like a Shari beard, right? So there was this Qari who came from a young Qari who came from Egypt. Right? He came from Egypt. He was a young, handsome young man, mashallah. And he started. He was, I guess, a very famous Qari, and he didn't even come in Islamic dressing. He had like a suit coat, and he had pants, shirt, and he stuck out like a sore thumb in that madrasa. There's 700 kids there. They're all like in jubbas and thobes and amamas and beards, and this guy is sitting here with a suit, and he's like reciting Quran. He rocked it with his qira'ah, mashallah, number one. But then what happened later on, it turned out, and if I'm not mistaken, it was something very special. So people, the students, they're students, right? They're like, man, who's this guy? He doesn't even follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's reading Quran, and they're probably ascribing all types of things. That some people read the Quran and it doesn't go past their throat, and this and that. And it turns out, subhanAllah, that person had so much love for the Prophet ﷺ. Every single day he sent, I think, I don't know, 10,000 salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. And when something like that came out, I still remember one of the brothers like saying, one of the students like, man, you should never think anything about anyone. You never know. You just never know who's who, right? It might, even if you see someone, for example, they're dating a girl or doing something, maybe that's what they're struggling with, but every night they're going and making tawbah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts their tawbah and He accepts their repentance. And maybe we had done something way in the past, we did never even bother to make tawbah for it, and now we have more sin than that individual. So we should be very careful, right, to judge anyone. Even my I had I've given this example before in the past too. I had a student who was a drug dealer, so he was and really trying hard to get him off. He had an alcohol addiction as well. Sort of struggled with him for a long, long, long time. It was just like and this is the nature of these type of things. I was also young. I wasn't as experienced, so you sort of think like it's easy to sometimes, not easy, but you can solve these problems. And oftentimes with people with those type of things, you're not necessarily looking to rid them of that problem or that disease. Like if they're addicted to drinking, there's a percentage. Now I shouldn't say small percentage. There's a percentage that you may be able to salvage, and there's going to be another percentage that's going to have a relapse remitting course. So they go out and then they fall back, and they go out and they fall back, and they go out and they fall back. And the idea is that you have to keep on stringing them along, and you do the best you can, and they do the best they can, right? You have to have realistic expectations. But I still remember that somehow I was able to get this guy to come to one of these retreats, like a retreat like this. And my teacher happened to be there, right? So he went, and I went to my teacher, and I just sort of pulled him on the side. I said, there's this brother here. I've been working with him for a while. I just can't get him out of his addiction. And then he looked at me. He said, Malana, we all have addictions, right? And I think he was teaching me a lesson. That's at least what I took from it. That, like, don't think that you're Mr. Sheikh trying to get this kid. Like, there's no difference between you two either. That you're not better than him. Like, some people are addicted to that. Some people are addicted to dunya. So we all have our addictions. It was a very humbling lesson, right, that he gave at that moment. So we just should be careful about judging other individuals. I think the other extreme for that is when people say, "Don't tell me anything. Don't judge me." I mean, if you're doing something wrong, then people should be able to correct you. And I mean, if our children, you see your child doing something wrong, and I say, hey, you shouldn't do that. He says, don't judge me, right? That's not going to fly, right? You're going to get a judgment and a punishment, right? I'm going to be the judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to you. So you have to, I mean, it's part of therapy. It's part of training your children. And we'll talk about that in the next portion. Mhm. So the next one is next disease is anger. Um, in the Quran, it comes about أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس. And those people who do kazam, who suppress their anger. والعافين عن الناس. There's a step that's even beyond that. والعافين, and then they forgive the people. One of the du'as that we read in Laylatul Qadr is اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عني. What is the difference between ghafara and afa? Ghafra in the Arabic language means to cover something. So when you cover something, it still remains under the cover. But when you do off, you annihilate it. It doesn't exist. So over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about wal kadhimin al ghayth. So what happens is when something happens and a person becomes angry, the anger starts to well up in the individual. Right? You can feel it, and actually it wells up so much so that you can see the anger on a person's face. They get red, right? Their veins start to pop. You sometimes some people start sweating, right? It wells up, and it's such a precise description. The word in the Quran is kadham, and kadham talks. It refers to, for example, if you have a river, and the river fills up to the banks so much so that it's about to overflow, but the meniscus is right there, but it's just holding it in, meaning it's barely holding it in. That's kadham. So sometimes you're so full of anger, you just want to do it, but you're just holding it in, right? It really gives you that feeling of control with in the Arabic language. So what happens is you hold it in. Some people don't express their anger. Then what happens? That anger turns into a grudge, right? So people find the person says something, they were about to punch him, they're like, "Ugh, fine, whatever," and then they walk away. But for the rest of the day, they're carrying something inside, right? They have this hatred, this hate, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. Just forget about it. Just wipe it out. It's okay. It's hard to do. I completely understand. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you after that, وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. I love those people who live at the level of ihsan. So yeah, you don't have. Why should I forgive him? Because you want Allah to love you, right? If you're able to forgive him, you'll inshallah be at the level of ihsan. And if you have ihsan, then Allah will love you. So now Allah is giving you a motivation why you should follow this procedure. A person came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, give me some advice. The Prophet ﷺ could have told him anything, right? Anything in the world. And he just told him, La taghdab, don't get angry. And then he went and he came and asked him again. And he said, La taghdab, don't get angry. And he asked him the third time. And he said, La taghdab, don't get angry. It is such an important advice because people, when they get angry, they lose control and end up doing the worst things. If we look back in our lives, probably the worst things that we've said with our tongues happened when we were angry. When we become angry, we even take the people that we love the most in our life, that normally we would take a bullet for them, and hurt them in ways that it takes them a long time to get over that. Right? Can you imagine hurting someone that you actually love? And it all happens because of this terrible disease called anger. And that's why it's been referred to as the ocean of all diseases. Right? That a lot of the negative diseases actually stem from this. And Rumi, he actually says the reason that drinking is prohibited is because that it facilitates anger. I mean, it's proverbial. What do they call it? Where do people get into fights? At bars, right? Where do people get into fights? At clubs because they're drunk. He's saying it's not something which is inherently wrong in the drinking itself. It's the anger that comes downstream from it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, let's cut it at the root. Just don't go near drinking. Now, why do people get angry? People get angry sometimes because of lack of control. They want to effect a certain outcome and things are not going their way. So then they start getting angry. So I'll give you an example. Okay, Zaid, do the dishes. Dad, I'm tired. Zaid, dishes. No. Zaid, did you hear me? I'm your dad. I'm telling you, do the dishes. No. What are you going to do about it? So now starts escalating, right? Now in the next, the fathers are trying to apply control to the situation. His teenagers being insolent and rebellious and pushing back. So what's going to happen? Eventually, the words start becoming harsher. Then the words becoming less nice. Then they start going into swear words. No, then it starts going into loud, like people start shouting. Then they start shouting back at each other. Then the swear words start coming in, and then it starts getting physical, right? And that's why whether it's physical abuse and spousal abuse and domestic abuse, which is a real problem and it's not justified. Where does it stem from? It stems from anger. um, so how do you deal with this? The way that you deal with this, understand that anger is just an emotion. It comes and it goes. It's very light, actually. Sometimes people feel like in the moment it's just so strong, you feel like you'll never go away. And at that moment, everything is crystal clear that you just need to punch that person in the face. Give yourself 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Sit down. Just sit down and it just goes away. I mean, you're still mad, but you won't necessarily want to punch the person. And give yourself 5 more minutes. You're like, man, forget about it. This guy's not worth it. Let's go home. 5 minutes. How can something that was going to make you do something so extreme go away in 5 minutes? And it comes in hadith too that there's different types of combinatorial possibilities. There's some people who who heat up very fast, right, and they're slow to come down. So they heat up very fast, and then it takes a long time for them to come down. That's the worst situation. What we want to be is in the situation where it's slow to heat up, right? It's very hard to get them angry, and if they get angry, even it happens. We're all human beings. Then they're very quick to come down and forgive, right? So sometimes you will lose it with your kids. Sometimes you might lose it on your spouse. That's fine, in the sense. I mean, I'm not saying it's fine, but people are people, and if that happens, just be very quick to forgive. So now if the other party comes and says sorry, the son says sorry, you're like, you just look away like that. It's going to hurt the kid more, right? They were nice enough to come and say sorry. You're like, don't worry about it. It's just uh, I shouldn't have shouted. And you just patch it up and just move on. The other thing, the second reason that people become angry is when someone does or acts in a way that is disliked to individuals. And this really has to do with people's values, and this is going to be different for everyone else. When a person's values are being overstepped, then the reaction is to get angry. So, for example, if you're a scholar and you see someone taking a book of knowledge and putting it on the ground, that's going to make you angry. But if you were a farmer and you saw someone do that, you're like, okay, right? But if someone like pushes your cow and puts it where it doesn't belong, where a wolf can get him, they're going to start shouting because that's what they understand. People are going to have different values. And depending on what your values are, when those things are overrun, then people get angry. The third reason is when a person feels attacked, right? Especially about, so now if someone's going to come and punch you, you're going to feel angry. You're going to want to punch them back. And that's completely fine. This primal need to defend for water, for food, for shelter, for family, for your dependents, that feeling of anger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed it there for a reason. And it's okay to act on that. And it's actually important to. Another reason that people can get angry is when there's a threat to their dignity or their honor, right? So if a person comes and says, you know, blank word you, people inherently will want to get angry. Now, um, this is a little bit more trickier how to deal with anger in this situation. So Imam Ghazali, his standpoint on the issue is that if someone comes, because look, it's also at a certain level your responsibility to uphold your own honor. It's not, we're not told to just be like doormats that people walk on us. That's not a good thing. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika an adlimu aw uzlam, that I don't want to oppress anyone else. I also don't want to be oppressed, right? You don't want to be like someone that people just abuse and use and throw away. That's not respectable life. You should live a noble life. So he said that as long as you avoid haughtiness and humiliation, then it's okay to stand up and use your anger in this type of situation. And this can also come from the chapter or the category of al-kibr bil-mutakabbirin, that getting arrogant with other people who are arrogant. So for example, if there's a bully who's always bullying you around, if you're going to be Mr. Sufi and soft and stuff, he's going to keep on pounding you, right? And he's going to keep on pushing you around. Sometimes you need to stand up to the bully, right? You say, hey, you can't do that. And he said, oh, you stand up to me? Yeah, I'm going to stand up to you. And you're not going to cross that line. And if I am, I'm calling the police, right? If the husband's coming home and taking a frying pan and slamming in the wife's face, and yes, that does happen, she says, the next time you're going to do that, you're going to jail. End of story. And it's hard when you're the victim to stand up. But you need to do that, and you need to fight for yourself. Now, Sidi Ahmed Az-Zurruq, rahimullah, his standpoint, he said, is when if an ignorant person comes and says something bad about you, don't react. He said, just ignore it. He's a jahil, right? They're just, imagine like a small kid comes says something to you, don't take it seriously. So if you know if your spouse says something, and just let it roll off your back, don't make a big deal out of it. And there are people who used to train their hearts to really feel like not have an ego. So when someone comes and says something to them, they're like, okay, right? It doesn't move them, right? One of them is because they had inner strength, right? And just because the person says you're stupid doesn't make you stupid. Like, I know who I am. So they would say this to the Prophet ﷺ. His name was Muhammad, the most praised. And they say, oh Muzammam, right? Oh, what's that called? Dispraised one, cursed one. So but the Prophet ﷺ didn't bat an eyelash. He was so cool, mashallah, just cool. And when people said, Ya Rasulullah, they're saying bad about you, like to the best of humans, they're calling him Muzammam, na'udhu billah min dhalik. He said, I don't know, they're talking about some guy named Muzammam. I'm Muhammad. He knew who he was. If you know who you are, it doesn't make a difference what other people say, right? You can just let in one ear out the other. At least that's what they teach you. So you can deal with it in that way. And Abu Damdam was actually praised by the Prophet ﷺ because when his sifa, his characteristic is when people used to say things or speak ill of him, he just wouldn't get angry. He just kept his cool. So I mean, it's a good sifa to have. And in the spiritual path, in Tazkiyah, people actually get trained to sort of get rid of the ego, because you don't want to get mad just because of someone's. That's the other thing. Like, you should protect your honor, but it's a fine line between that and having an ego, right? So people sometimes have a big ego, and there's a pretty prominent mufti, mashallah. So his sheikh used to do. He was doing his tarbiyah, so he was in the back of the car, and it's a long. He was training him for years and years and years. So he said, let's say his name is Ahmed. He said, Ahmed, did you do that thing that I told you? And he said, yeah, I did it. He says, what do you mean you did it? You didn't even do it properly. And he started taking him one way. You're good for nothing. You don't know what you're doing. I've been training you for 10 years. You can't do a simple task properly. And he just ripping him. And that person, he said, yes, Sheikh, how you're saying that's right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it. Very respectful, very humble. And then the Sheikh smiled. He said, now you're ready. Right? Now you're ready, because it didn't touch you. Right? You had that level of humility.
Sometimes you have to ignore the.
No. And then the fifth category where people become angry is ghira. So, and this is a good thing for a person to have, is a sense of indignation, a sense of anger that comes out of respect and out of honor. For example, if a person will have ghira about their wife, right? The person shouldn't like that other people are sitting there looking at their wife. Like, what are you looking at? I'm going to take out your eyes, right? You better look the other way. And it's ajib because in this generation, it's like these kids have no ghira. They don't. They actually want other people to look at their significant other, because they use them as like trophy wives or trophy girlfriends, because they want to show off, like, look what I got, right? It's they're like treating them like they're like cars or something. Like, oh, that's your car. Look, I got a better car. I mean, the one of the people I went to purchase something from, he was saying that, he was telling me about, he had like 5 divorces, and he eventually got married to a stalker. Long story, but the girl that he got married to, she happened to, he was just like talking about her. He's like, oh my God, no, I don't even deserve her. She's this, like this, and her body's like this, and she does fitness videos online. And I'm like, I don't want to be hearing this. Like, why are you telling me about your wife? But like, he's talking so openly, like there's like showing off something which is private. I mean, if it was me, like I don't even like a person to like hear my wife's name or something. It's like you should feel some honor about your wife, about your daughter, about your husband, whatever the case may be. And this is a good sifat. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ana aghyaru minkum." I have the most ghira from all of you. Wallahu aghyaru minni, and Allah subhanahu wa taala has more ghira than me. And the way that you transgress the ghira of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by transgressing his maharim. There are things لِكُلِّ مَلِكٍ حِمَى وَحِمَى اللَّهِ مَحَارِمَهُ. Every king has his territory, and the territory of Allah, the boundaries of it are the things that He made haram. So just don't do haram and get into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bad book.
The problem with this culture, is that showing
Yeah.
stuff off because of low self-esteem. And seeing people who may not have that, if you get mixed in this, will rub off on you.
Hmm.
And people who sometimes come out of it, it's going to be very hard to change.
Yeah, it's very hard to change. And there was and it's sad because a person is thinking of getting married to a particular person, so they said, let me show her to my friends, because they want the validation from the friends before they say, okay, she's good enough for you before you're married. You're starting off on the wrong foot, right? This is not a competition. You're finding a life partner. You need to see someone who will be on this journey of you in life and be by your side through thick and through thin, and then you work towards a common goal. There has to be that type of understanding. When you go into these type of relationships for all the wrong reasons, then there's no surprise that you have a 50% or 60% divorce rate, because you got into it for the wrong reason.
A lot of people men don't want to marry ugly women because they said, you got ugly women, you must don't have good enough romantic abilities.
Hmm.
And so they might have a veil or something like that because they're embarrassed of them. Even though they might have a good personality at home,
Yeah.
that's why they married them, but they don't want to show them out.
Yeah,
And
people are
that's
just
very bad as far as beauty and ugly.
hmm exactly. And just I guess a side point to bear in mind, this whole idea in this culture we have of this person is this good looking and that good looking. First of all, the pictures that you see on anywhere are all doctored, right? Nothing happens without Photoshop. Nothing, right? See even the most beautiful woman and strip off all the makeup, and you don't have good lighting and this and that, and she just looks like a normal person. Maybe, I mean, there's a little bit of a difference, but it's not. It's a very unrealistic image that they create in the media. Number one. Number two, it's a different type of oppression where you try to take 3 billion women in the world, and they're all trying to look like three supermodels. It's impossible. Right? There's no way. And then the third thing to bear in mind is, like, we don't necessarily see people as some people are more beautiful than others. We understand that. We know that from hadith, like, because this is one of the reasons a woman is married, لِجَمَالِهَا. But all of the children of Adam are beautiful, right? Allahumma hassan khalqi fa hassan khuluqi. So, and the Prophet says, when he told different reasons that people get married, he instructed people, first, you to be that deen. Look for a person who has deen. Because you know what? At the end of the day, that's what's going to make a happy marriage. You could have the most beautiful person, but if they're a jerk, you can have the most handsome husband, but if they're a jerk, you're not going to have a happy life, right? Because life is, looks only get you so far. Anyways, that was a side point. But so, what is it was like, well, the Prophet someone asked, what is the worst thing? And he said, it's the wrath of Allah. So then the person asked the Prophet, how do you not get it? And he said, don't get angry. كَيْفَمَا تَدِينُ تُدَانُ. The way that you deal with other people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deal with you in that way. Mhm. So if you have Rahman people on earth, Allah will have Rahman you. If you forgive other people will forgive you. If you're always going around like a tyrant and you're like a Hitler and a dictator, then what do you expect on the day of Qiyamah? You think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be so nice to you? Right? Deal with people nicely. And we were told by the Prophet ﷺ not to issue a judgment in a state of anger. Like the hakim should not give his ruling when he's angry, because when you're angry, you're not thinking clearly. And in the commentary on this, they say that this also applies to anyone who's in any situation of power. If you're a teacher, if you are a parent, if you are a spouse, anytime you're in a situation of power, if you are angry, don't take action at that point. And Mulana Zakaria, I think he writes this in his Outbaiti. He said that I never hit my child. And this was in a time where that was very acceptable in the culture. Like even in the 1950s, the spankings were normal, right? These are cultural things. It wasn't abuse, but in that time, that's the way that they used to do tarbiyah. And he said, I never hit my child in a situation that I was angry. I would let my anger go. And then after that, for their tarbiyah, so that I knew that my intention was really to correct them, then they would get the punishment at that time. And this is like, I believe, like Ali radiallahu an, when he was in the middle of battle, he was about to strike the person's neck and he spit at him. And then he put down his sword. Because at that point, then he was going to kill him out of his anger, not for the sake of Allah. Right? So it's, you want to be sincere. And when you're sincere, sometimes even the wrong mistakes you do can have a positive effect. Like, for example, one of my teachers who taught us the Sahih Muslim, Imam Muslim, he had a student and he said that, I dedicate this book. So he eventually went on to become a scholar. He wrote a book and he said, I dedicate this book to the stick of my teacher, right? That he used to whack me, but he used to whack me to keep me straight. And because he did it sincerely, it had a good effect. Like the person saw that and he said, like, yeah, I needed that. But some people need takhweef. Some people need to be scared. Other people, sometimes they do much less. They didn't even never hit the thing. They're always shouting, but it has a very bad effect. They're like, I don't want anything to do with Quran. They'd run away. They're like, all these Muslims are like this. Sometimes they leave Islam. And these are people who went to the same school. How come some kids have that experience and some people have that experience? This is the power of intention, right? If you have a good intention, it bears good fruits. The Prophet, like I mentioned, was a human and he did get angry, but there were certain situations where he would get angry. And it was either for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or due to some type of aberration in human character or human behavior. So, and the way the Prophet ﷺ would get angry, he wouldn't lose control. Right? The way the Sahaba would be able to tell that he was angry is that he used to have a vein on his forehead and the vein would stand up. And when that happened, it was like, whoa, 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 right? Like they would get their act straight. It's like there's these young girls, they used to say about their father, like he never had to get angry at them. He just had to get them the eye, right? At the dinner table, he just looks at them like that. And they're like, they knew like, I'm not gonna mess with that. Right? Yeah. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything, right? But they got the point. And the Prophet ﷺ used the same technique to bring tarbiyah into the Sahaba or the situation.
My son's like that. I never opened it, but just,
Mashallah. It's good. So the other thing to bear in mind is that anger is important because it actually motivates people to action. It makes us stand up for the oppressed. It makes us fight against injustice, and we need that to correct wrongs in society. It motivates people to defend themselves. But the thing to bear in mind is that when you exercise anger, it has to be surgical, meaning that you needs to be done based on the right time, in the right place, for the right reason, and with the right intensity. It has to be very, and so the main idea is that anger can be powerful. It can change other people. It can correct things around you, but you have to not lose control. That's the main thing. The problem that people do is they use anger, but it's like, it's like those, like if you have like a hose and the water's coming out, if you don't direct it, the water's just going to go everywhere, right? But if you direct it in the right place and it waters the right tree, then the tree will grow and it gets where it needs to get to. So people are like that. They let the anger and it just goes open and they're spraying bullets everywhere. It doesn't help anyone. The idea is to be very direct to achieve a particular goal, then it can actually be helpful. The Prophet ﷺ also mentioned that the strong person is the one who controls. ليس الشديد بسرعة أو كما قال. It's not the person who can beat another person when they're wrestling, but the person who can control their anger. And this is really, I think, a lesson to our youth. They spend so much time in the gym. I mean, when I was growing, people went to the gym, but it was usually when you were a bodybuilder. There wasn't really a culture of, being a gym rat. But now it's like everyone is in the gym, right? So everyone wants to get buff. Everyone's taking these protein shakes. Everyone's building their bodies because they want to look a certain way. And they feel like they're strong, right? I can pick up this many plates. I can bench this much. I can do this much. But you're not strong if you can't control your anger. Those are the people who have the least control over their anger. So you're not strong, right? Rather than getting buff in your muscles, get control over your nafs. Get control over the ego.
They got controlled by shaitan.
Yeah. So you like instead the hours that you're spending in the gym, spend them working on yourself and in dhikr, so that you don't get angry when the anger comes up. Because then you can say, man, that person is a strong person because they have self-control. Right? That's so few people have self-control. So, what are the treatments of anger? I'm just going to go to them quickly. Number one, remember the virtues of forbearance and humility. Sayyid Ahmed Zarruq, he said that the reason that people get angry is because they have an inflated ego. And we see that the Prophet didn't used to get angry, even when people used to taunt him. He was the most forgiving of people. He was the most humble of people. And we have to understand that whoever is humble for the sake of Allah, Allah will raise them. Man khada'a lillahi rafa'ahu Allah. So, if a person is in a situation of people are saying insolent things to them and they just remain calm, even the person who is saying that to you, in the back of their mind, they'll have some respect for you. They said, that guy, he has pretty good self control. He didn't respond. And those people are saying that because they want you to react. Don't give them what they want, right? You're actually helping them. The other thing is that remembering that everything is happening by the leave of Allah. So the fact that someone is doing that to you, that's happening through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. It's not that He wants them to do some zulm on you, but it's happening by His will. So for you, it's a test. And this is a bigger lesson. It's a subtle lesson, but an important lesson for people to realize. Why do bad things happen in life? Sometimes bad things happen not because they're bad, but because they're opportunities. If no one did anything wrong to you in your life, you would never have a chance to forgive. Think about that. If no one ever did anything bad to you, you could never forgive and you could never bring the hasana of forgiveness on the day of Qiyamah.
Yes.
You would never have the opportunity.
Mhm.
If no one got you angry, you would never have a chance to exercise self-control. And you could never earn the reward of self-control because no one ever got you angry. Everything was perfect. So we have to stop seeing these things as bad things or tribulations, but really as challenges. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting us in challenges so that we can overcome those challenges and make ourselves better and make our akhirah better. The third thing is to read A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, because when a person is angry, shaitan is running through your veins. He is having a party, right? He is pumping through your veins. Like, do it, yeah, yeah, do it. He's like pushing you, egging you on. And sometimes people just go way too far, right? Like there's recently a person who it's really sad, but they ended up killing a young child. And then they look at their Google search, 8-year-old baby not responding, and like all these weird things because he's like, what did I just do? Right? And he's trying to cover us. Sometimes it starts off, with a little bit of anger, and before you know it, your shaitan's pushing you, it just goes too far. Sometimes this shaken baby syndrome, like people shake their babies. This is 8-month-old child, for God's sake. They're gonna cry. Like we were on the plane one time, and there's this guy behind us, and we had our Yusuf with us. He's three years now, but at that time he was probably like a year. I mean, he was crying. It's in the plane. It's going up. It's a new thing. He was tired. This and that, and the guy is like, just beat him. Just beat your kid, right? Make him like be quiet. And we were just like shocked, right? And we're like, what does this guy do for a living? He's like, he's a teacher. You shouldn't be around kids. Like you need to revoke your license. But and later on, he's like, he ended up apologizing. He said, I was just tired. I wanted to go to sleep. But that's what kids, and it's really the dumbest thing that you can do, right? If a child is crying, if you hit him, it's not going to, right? Like, think about the logic of that. It doesn't even make sense. And that's what happens when people are angry, they're not problem solving, they're just taking out their frustration, right? And that doesn't help anyone. If you're standing up, then sit down or lie down, drink water, put water on your face, make wudu. These are all good things. And we were just talking about children, but one of the scholars, he makes a beautiful point. He says that children go through 3 phases. And so we have some people here who are starting young families. One is the first 7 years, and in that phase, the main things that they're doing is about eating and attention. So give your children attention. Stop ignoring them. If they say ba 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 ba, no no no, I'm busy right now. Give them attention, right? And because they need, when they ask you for your attention, they need it, and basically just feeding them. It's like basic primal needs. And the next age is actually the age of anger. right? The next 7 years. And in this age, they get annoyed very easily. And then the next phase is the age of reasoning, the next 7 years. So Imam Ali radiallahu an, he would say that in the first 7 years, just play with your kids. Right? That's all they want to do. And if you actually read in modern psychology, they talk about 15 minutes a day of mat time, right? Or meaning that you get down on the floor. And sometimes people say, like, "What? I don't even know what to do. I don't know how to play with my kids." Right? It doesn't come with a manual. Don't worry. Just sit down with them. They'll tell you what they want to play. Right? They say, "Baba, let's do this." They'll jump on your head. They'll figure it out. You don't have to worry about that. Just be present. And it doesn't. And sometimes people are like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? I have my kids the whole day. I don't know what to do with them." Right? You don't need to spend every single minute with them, because normally what happens is kids play with other kids. We live in a weird situation in the U.S. where kids don't have access to other kids, but back home, like in Africa, in India, like your kids are the whole day they're out and they play with other kids, and they just see you, for a little bit of time. It's sort of unnatural that we're expected. Like, you can't be Mr. Academic Professor and feel like come down and expect to spend 10 hours with a 2-year-old and it's be engaged for 10 hours. It's just not natural. It's not going to happen. You're going to go crazy, and the child will be happy, but you're going to go crazy. But just 15 minutes, and that's enough, really, for the kids. That's enough to satisfy them. And then the other times they have to learn to. I'm particularly talking about fathers, right? The mothers obviously will spend more time with the children. And then they said, Ali radiallahu anh, he said, for the next 7 years, he said, this is the time when they're in this age of anger. This is where you discipline them, right? Because now they're feeling out their borders. So this is the times where you want to show that there's consequences. These are the limits. This is where this is how you behave. You do their tarbiyah, right? Doesn't mean you have to get angry and give them punishments, but you have to. There's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. They need to understand that they can't do whatever they want, and you need to teach them what the right thing and what the wrong thing is. And if they do the wrong thing, there's going to be consequences. You might lose a privilege, or you might get a punishment. And if you do the right thing, you're going to get a reward. There's a very simple way to get them through that phase. And then after that, he says, for the next 7 years, um, he says that be a friend to them, right? You've taught them really what you need to teach. And at this point, like, no, if you take a 19-year-old and start treating him like a 7-year-old, he's going to rebel, right? And you don't even have, the fact of the matter, once you have a 19-year-old, you don't even have control with them anyway. You only have as much control as people give you. So unless you're paying for their bills and you can use that as leverage, I mean, even if that, I mean, he's like, fine, I'll work at a gas station. I'd rather have my independence. But if you're a friend to them and you show them kindness and compassion, they won't run away from you. They'll run to you. And that's what you want them to do. And actually, that's a very important stage in children's lives, in their young adolescence, all the way to age 21, where they're becoming a man, that they need a figure to stand by their side, to show them how life works, who understands the problems, and help them as they're, not judge them, but help them as they're solving their own problems, sometimes making their own mistakes and learning from them, but being that support, being the wind under their wings. And Sheikh Adhami, he actually explained this very nicely. Some people, like helicopter parents, just like right on top of their kids all of the time. And he said that's not okay. He said, huh? Yeah, micromanagers. So he said that your children's, they're like a small eagle. They need to spread their wings. If you stand too close, you're gonna keep on hitting that thing. They cannot spread. He said, let them spread their wings, let them fly. Trust that what you have done and taught them at the age till the age of 14, all the time that you spent with them, all the hadiths and the masjid that you took them to, and all the things that they learned, that now is their time to use those principles on their own, because they have to make those choices, and let them fly. And if you see them falling down, that's when you swoop down and pick them up, right? Don't let them fall. You still have to watch, but watch from a little bit of space. Don't get too close. So it was a very nice piece of wisdom.
We're gonna build the love with the parents.
Yeah, building the love of the parents, subhanAllah. Um, the other thing to bear in mind is that some people have a more angry personality than others, right? الناس معادن. People have different inner metals. Some people are just very soft, and it comes easy to them. It's harder for them to get angry. Other people have a more, we say, like Jalali personality, right? There's more raw, and they're more forceful, like Umar radiallahu anh. It was known, like one time before the ayah of hijab was, before the hijab was revealed, there were some women by the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar radiallahu anh, he came in, and the woman booked. They heard him coming, they booked into the other room, and then the Prophet was basically laughing, right? That they ran away. So he asked them, he said, "Why do you guys run away?" They said, "Oh no, you get angry a lot, right? You get angry." Like they're afraid that he was going to get angry at them. And he says, "Well, what's wrong with you women? You're scared of me and you're not scared of the Prophet ﷺ, right?" And then Rasulullah, he just like smiled and laughed. He said that, this Umar, if he was going down one path, shaitan would go down the other path, right? So Umar radiallahu an did have uh, a more, you could say, angry type of personality. But when he came into Islam, then Islam shaped that anger in such a way that he was able to be in control of it. He still had that personality, that a foreboding personality that you would feel awe with him. But he was tough. But he wasn't. He was going to transgress your right. He wasn't the person who's going to punch you. He wasn't going to be the person who's going to do some zulm or oppression to you. The deen helped him control that, right? And I can give you another example of that. There was this one teacher that we had who was notorious in the entire Darul Uloom for his anger, right? Because just because you become a scholar doesn't mean you're still a human being, right? So he had, and he himself said, my anger was such, and he also had this personality, like, he's just scary, like, and he said even the teachers used to be scared of him, right? And they used to say that, when he used to come down the halls, you would hear his cane. And it's like fear in people's hearts, it's like the Grim Reaper is coming. And, subhanAllah, then he eventually found a sheikh. And he said everyone was like had it with me, or it was difficult for everyone. Even my wife, she was just like thing. And then he found a sheikh. He worked on himself. He was making dhikr, and his wife even became surprised at how soft you've become. Right now, I can tell you, even his soft version was plenty scary. Right, but if that's the soft version of you, I don't want to see what you were like before. Right, you can still make grown men cry, but the deen reins it in. Right, it gives some level and modicum of safety that people don't lose control.
He knows he was like that. He was angry, and he used to ask Allah Subhanahu wa Taala to let him come down. You see, Allahumma lajinni. And Umar one time he entered in the masjid early before Fajr, and he was walking in the dark, and he stepped in somebody, and the guy he said, "Anta Umar?" Umar he said, "La, ana Umar." And the people around him, they say, we're gonna beat him. He said, no, he didn't say that something wrong. He asked me, are you Umar? I said, no, I'm Umar. That's it.
MashaAllah.
But because he's holding his
he was
his
able
anger.
to. Naam.
You call it being mean.
Yeah.
A mean person.
And the last two ones, very quickly, is that avoid haste in all matters. Al-ajlatu min ash-shaytan. Right? Don't jump to something. If you get too hot, remove yourself from the situation. And the last advice is that remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more power over us when you're disobedient. So if He can do that, then that will help us control our anger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from this disease. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.
Also, you have to go in your anger, go to the dhikr. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innu al-qulub. Bismillah ya Allah. Allah.